and welcome to Practical and Intuitive Management. What is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is often thought of as incomprehensible rules and time-wasting procedures, and there are many ways which it can come to life in an organization. Think overly cumbersome compliance and control. What about multiple rounds of approvals a piece of work may need? Then there is a manager that you have to go through to talk to another department. Essentially, all of these get in the way of productivity and innovation and serve to disengage people. Governments are well-known hotbeds for bureaucratic practices. Think how painful it is to get an NBI clearance, or why it takes so much time to receive unified multipurpose IDs, or what bureaucratic processes it may need to be publicized. These are examples of how bureaucracy can come to life in the government, but it is also rife at the highest levels and can have a dramatic effect on a country's prosperity. Back in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, New Zealand was crippled by a far-reaching state bureaucracy and control. To order a magazine or buy a car, you need to apply for a permit, which usually takes a couple of months to process. This model was strangling to the economy and crippling its competitiveness. By 1984, the economy was stagnating and close to failing. The government could not borrow any more money offshore, and there was upcoming payment deadlines that the government couldn't meet. Then the government at that time, Robert Maldon, called for a snap election. His party lost and came in the new Prime Minister, David Land, and a new Finance Minister, Roger Douglas. Douglas rolled out a set of policies that sought to deregulate industries radically, lift controls, and crush bureaucracy. These policies became known as Rogernomics. Literally overnight, the extreme reach of the government was removed and the economy was open to the world. Government agencies were drastically streamlined, and any role in any department that was considered to be producing busy work but not adding value was removed. The Forest Service went from having 17,000 employees to 17. The Department of Transportation went from having 5,600 employees to 53. Many state-owned enterprises were sold to private sector. Bureaucratic practices and cumbersome legislations were removed. Taxes were simplified, and all of a sudden, there was a monumental shift away from anything that was overly complicated, added little value, and inefficient, toward being open and lean and adding value. The government became streamlined, efficient, and focused on enabling and fostering a competitive economy. Obviously, this kind of change was traumatic but highly necessary. People were forced to adjust and evolve. Innovation was now freed, and people were encouraged to think and take ownership of their success. Fast forward 30 years later, New Zealand is regularly ranked as the most prosperous country in the world. Across various rankings, New Zealand usually is within top 3 for ease of doing business, least corruption, safest, and freest in the world. The country has the most innovative primary sector and is recognized as a hub for innovation and creativity. Local businesses are now so agile so that if market conditions change offshore, they can immediately adjust to it. Without overbearing and burdensome controls and regulations, the country is primed to think, innovate, and create. It is clear that New Zealand's current success would not have been possible without the identification and removal of debilitating controls, processes, and bureaucracy. One of the key areas that is impacted by bureaucracy is speed. Bureaucracy acts like an anchor, prohibiting efficiency and killing momentum. This can have important implications in certain contexts. US scientists have recently made a lot of progress in the field of gene editing. The technology named CRISPR-Cas9 acts like molecular scissors, enabling doctors to cut and repair DNA. The method can be potentially used to heal many ailments, including cancer. However, as it is a new technology and one that could have potential harmful medical side effects, it has to go through regulatory review and gain approval. This clearly makes sense as there has to be adequate testing and reviews to ensure safety prior to broadly rolling it out. The challenge is that bureaucratic practices, agencies including the FDA, results in the review period taking an exorbitant amount of time. The University of Pennsylvania, which has applied for the federal approval, has spent 2 years addressing all of the federal requirements and still have not received clearance. In the meantime, the tool is being used in other countries where gaining regulatory approval is not so cumbersome. The tool has already reportedly helped numerous patients in countries, including China. This example demonstrates that while there is role for regulatory intervention in certain industries, bureaucratic practices can inhibit access to potentially life-saving technology for prolonged periods of time. An important contributor for bureaucratic practices is unwieldy processes. Defining processes for how to complete organizational tasks has been bread and butter, management, and consultant work for decades. The Genesis process definition goes back as far as Frederick Taylor, who at the turn of 20th century carefully observed his workers in an industrial setting and was able to define the steps they take to get the work done. This definition enabled him to explore and design new ways of organizing the steps to improve efficiency and productivity. Identifying better ways of doing a repeatable process has been a core management task for a long time and delivered tons of value to businesses over the past century. Given the attention and processes have received over the past century, it is no wonder that designing good processes has become a bit of an art form. Enter Six Sigma. There are actually belts in Six Sigma, like karate, given to those that achieve a certain level of process proficiency. A couple of decades ago, the school of Six Sigma was melded with another school called Lean. Lean is how organizations manage their business with a strong effectiveness orientation. It was a beautiful marriage between the process karate fighters and the cost-conscious bean counters. Their love child was Lean Six Sigma, which delivered a capability that built beautiful, detailed processes that were guided by cost effectiveness. The focus of this capability was on processes in the heart of manufacturing, distribution, and core back office areas like finance, HR, and procurement. However, the issue today is that process wizards have gone a little too far and everything within a business has been defined, organized, and broken down into a process. We have become engendered with the process orientation. As part of the 20th century organization model of control, clear processes with associated roles meant that work could be controlled from high above. As this discussed in the earlier chapter in structure, if people are forced to adhere to strict predefined processes, their brains check out and they lose the desire and ability to innovate. Over time, we also stop questioning these processes. The clunky, unwieldy, and energy time-consuming processes became part of an organizational makeup. Performance management is clearly an essential activity within organizations. But for decades, the process of setting goals, both performance and development, referencing a detailed competency chart that is tied to levels and then going through the mid-year and annual performance reviews, took an age to complete. The process was so clunky that people just wanted to get through it. The value of the activity was lost because people become too focused on just getting it done due to its time-consuming nature, instead of focusing on the huge value it should deliver to an organization's workforce. Then around 2010, some authors' organization began to question some of the core assumptions of performance management, such as the performance bell curve and ratings. This proved to be a catalyst for leaders to question their performance management processes were designed appropriately. When they reached out for feedback from their workforce, all of a sudden, all of the pain over the years of wasted time getting through this clunky process came out. Leaders for the first time realized that much of their people's time and energy was being invested into the process that wasn't delivering an appropriate return. Consequently, performance management processes across the majority of organizations have been transformed over the past 5 to 8 years. In short, relying on machine to complete all your processes is not that much reliable. When simplifying work, we look at the organization and review and simplify their performance management approach. We help them to better align their global competencies with their strategy so that people build capabilities that would deliver the type of performance the company needed to win in the market. Also, we reveal where the greatest value in the performance management lifecycle exists. Getting clear on what is most important enabled disproportionate investment to be directed to those areas delivering greater value. Examples of other processes that have become unwieldy and inappropriately time-consuming include budget setting. The process is so cumbersome, painful, and time-consuming, it often requires multiple rounds of iterations and sign-offs. It's especially time-consuming for those companies that use zero-based budgeting. Instead of leaning on the year before, each budget has to start from zero and justify forecasted expense. It makes a lot of sense in theory as it is meant to keep an organization as lean as possible. But the problem is that in practice, the process often becomes unwieldy and unnecessarily time-consuming. Another is travel booking and expense processing. In this day of significant cost controls, booking business travel is painful due to multiple approvals required and ensuring adherence with strict cost parameters. Many conditions exist to drive costs down, like ensuring that travel is booked a certain number of weeks ahead or not spending over a certain limit on a hotel or food. There are also strict parameters on what can be expensed and what cannot. When a traveler returns, they then need to go through the time-consuming process of submitting their expenses and monitoring approval and reimbursement. The third example is keeping on top of compliance. Ensuring that the workforce remain compliant and risk is managed appropriately can be another huge time suck for people. Some industries are more impacted by these requirements than others. One man working at a global accountancy appreciated the amount of time required each year to keep up with the compliance. There are likely many opportunities to streamline and enhance the way the workforce is kept in compliance, but he remembers clicking through the compulsory compliance e-learning screens as fast as he could, and it felt like a big waste of time. Like the performance management example, the focus on getting through a cumbersome, time-consuming process instead of focusing on the most important elements. A useful exercise to do with your team or your internal organization effectiveness group is to schedule a biannual or annual review of your core processes. Get clear on what your people spend their time with during the year, and then as objectively as you can, explore the following questions for each process or activity. First question, what value does this process deliver? How does this process positively impact the business? Second, how time-consuming is this process? Third, what part of this process delivers the most value? Fourth, do we have the right people involved with the process? Fifth, is this process truly needed? It will take courage to challenge embedded ways of working. People become used to bureaucracy, so introducing change, even if it is common sense, can be met with resistance. There must be commitment from leadership and ideally, a strong, clear strategic focus on simplification. This guiding light provides permission to question the status quo and reduce those things that don't deliver value. People are less likely to resist if they know the work is supporting a broader strategic initiative. As Steve Jobs said, if you're ruled by processes, you don't need judgment, and I prefer judgment over process. While steps can be taken within functions and team to reduce or remove low-value processes or activities, many companies chosen to carve out chunks of repeatable processes and move them to low-cost outsourced providers. The reality today is that a vast majority of repeatable tasks will soon be automated. It is inevitable, process by process, system will increasingly take hold, automate and digitize. It is a wonderful opportunity to review the role of humans in each of these mechanical processes. Processes, rules, and other bureaucratic practices are common drivers of complexity and should be a target for simplification efforts. The more we can redesign or remove non-core, low-value activities and enable space and focus, the more likely we are to free performance potential of people.